most powerful missile weapon system ever deployed by the United States. Titan II helped defend our country during the Cold War from 1963 until 1986. Hello and welcome to the Titan Missile Museum. This is Launch Complex 571-7. It was active for almost 20 years. When the Air Force decommissioned this complex in 1982, it invited the Arizona Aerospace Foundation to preserve the facilities for historical purposes. 571-7 was turned into a museum in part simply to preserve the missile and the complex as important artifacts of 20th century technology, but also in hopes that a knowledge of how it worked and why we needed it might give you a better understanding of the complexities of defending the United States and the awesome responsibilities of doing so with nuclear weapons. 571-7 also stands as a constant reminder that peace is never fully won. It is only kept from moment to moment. The most remarkable thing about the engines are the enormous numbers you can throw around when you talk about them. For example, the sign says the first stage generates 430,000 pounds of thrust. Now, I don't know about you, but pounds of thrust is not a unit of measure that makes much sense to me. So I like to think of the power of the engine in more familiar terms. Think of the power of the first stage as being about equal to 2 747s running at full throttle. Now, the first stage burns for only 2.5 minutes. In other words, the entire working life of the first stage is 2.5 minutes, and then it's done forever. But in 2.5 minutes, the first stage consumes almost 25,000 gallons of propellants. That's 160 gallons a second. So the gas mileage is not very good. It goes really fast to make up for it. This engine has no off switch. Once it leaves the silo, there is no stopping it. It just goes and goes and goes, literally until it runs out of gas. So 2.5 minutes after launch, the propellants run out. The first stage is separated from the missile and goes falling back to Earth. At this point, the missile is something like 45 miles high and 45 miles north of here. So then the second stage kicks in and burns for about 3 minutes. It does have an off switch. The guidance system will shut it down at just the right instant. Then the second stage is separated. All that remains then is the RV with the bomb on board. Important point. Total flight time of the missile from launch to target destruction is something like 30 or 35 minutes, give or take. Of that time, only the first 5.5 minutes is powered flight. Everything else is ballistic flight. Ballistic just means that the RV is traveling the same kind of a path as a bullet fired from a gun. And just like a bullet, the RV is essentially coasting. So the RV coasts up to about 600 miles of altitude and does a ballistic free fall into the target. It's accurate enough that from 6,000 miles away, we can drop the bomb into a circle less than 1 mile in diameter. This is a UHF semi-hardened antenna. UHF means ultra-high frequency. During the Cold War, the Air Force had an airplane flying 24 hours a day. It was called Looking Glass, and it acted as the airborne command post. If the ground-based command posts were destroyed, the order to launch could be sent from Looking Glass. Getting into the underground portion of the complex requires a simple but extremely secure procedure. Here's how it works. You and your crew pull up to the main gate. Get out, pick up the gate phone, and call the control center. This is the first of 4 phone calls you need to make. The control center wants your name, rank, crew number, and a few other details, but basically this phone call amounts to, "Hi, we're here." The control center will push a button on the console down there. It'll unlock the gate, roll the gate open, drive in, close the gate behind you, park right over here. While the rest of your crew begins an inspection of the top side, you go down to the bottom of these stairs and pick up a second phone. Hi, this is Chuck at the outer portal door. Thank you. This is Chuck, ready to code in. Okay, Sierra, Whiskey, Delta, Alpha, Bravo, November. Very good, thank you. Once you know a little about the history of the Cold War, it's not difficult to understand what went on here and why. history of Titan II begins with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are the most powerful and destructive weapons ever devised. Nuclear weapons made it possible to wipe out entire cities with a single blow. The horrifying efficiency of nuclear weapons changed the basic thinking about how wars might be fought. Unlike the years-long conflicts of World Wars I and II, World War III might be over in less than 90 minutes. And more frightening still was the knowledge that there is no defense against nuclear weapons. Because the actual use of nuclear weapons would be so devastating, the U.S. nuclear missile program was designed not so much to fight a nuclear war, but to prevent one from ever starting. The concept is called peace through deterrence, and it depends on two important points. First, that the enemy understands that we'll use our missiles only to retaliate. And second, that the enemy understands that if they strike us and manage to destroy most or all of our country, that we can still retaliate with enough firepower to destroy most or all of their country. This threat of mutual annihilation, referred to by military planners as mutual assured destruction, or MAD, was the driving force behind peace through deterrence. The Cold War was essentially a political and economic struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. Each believed the other was bent on world domination. With the invention of the atomic bomb in 1945 and the hydrogen bomb just a few years later, both sides began stockpiling nuclear weapons in what became an arms race, amassing ever more powerful bombs and the bombers to deliver them. Then, in 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. This 184-pound satellite stunned the world, not because it was the world's first artificial satellite, but because it meant the Soviets appeared to have the ability to deliver a nuclear bomb with a missile. Unlike bombers, which took hours to reach their targets, a bomb delivered with a missile could make the trip in little more than 30 minutes. Then, in October 1962, we discovered the Soviets had secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the Florida coast. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of an all-out nuclear war. Titan II was born of our nation's deepest fears. Not only that an attack on our country could bring about an end to our way of life, but could bring about an end to the world as we know it. Through much of the last half of the 20th century, the concept of peace through deterrence kept the Cold War from turning hot. 54 Titan II missiles were installed at 3 locations in the U.S. There were 18 each in Little Rock, Arkansas, Wichita, Kansas, and here in Tucson, Arizona. The missile sites were buried deep underground, hardened against the effects of nuclear blast, heat, and radiation. Steel-reinforced concrete walls, some as thick as 8 feet, and massive 3-ton blast doors protected both missile and crew from the ravages of a nuclear explosion. And the pride and dedication of the Air Force men and women who worked in the Titan program. And to all of them, we'd just like to say, well done.
What we have here is a wall that's 4 foot thick, and it's interspersed with reinforcing bar that runs from 5/8 of an inch the size of your thumb, up to 2 1/4 inches the size of your elbow, or that railing out there. And there's one other big difference, it's on 9-inch centers. Now that's a much higher standard than normal commercial construction. And then every intersection is welded. It's not just wired, but welded to give it more structural strength. Then, with a concrete batch plant that we had aboard the construction site, all the walls in this entire complex were poured in one big continuous pour. No seams, no soft spots, no air holes, nothing that would weaken this wall whatsoever. Now we have 4 of these big blast doors, and they are in 2 pairs, and you can only open one of the pair at a time. They are interlocked. And so blast door 6 and blast door 7, that's what protects us from the outside world. And then we have 2 more back here. You see blast door 8, which is right straight ahead. then there's a long cableway that goes down to the silo itself. We'll be going down that after a little while. And those two doors, which are the same as this one, protect the control room from the silo should something not quite right go on down there. Let's go on into the control room and take a look at what we have in there. Swing right on in, folks. As I said before, the water's fine. Okay, I don't know if you noticed or not, but on the end of this cabinet it says no loan zone. I think Chuck explained that to you in the video, in that we have a 9 megaton thermonuclear bomb sitting out on top of Titan II. We don't want anybody fooling around with stuff, and the other reason is, of course, security or safety if somebody happens to get hurt. Here is where all of the action goes, is right here. This is the control center for this entire complex. So, with that in mind, let's go around the room here, show you the equipment that is at the disposal of the 4-man crew should they ever be ordered to launch Titan II. An air burst goes off at about 14,000 feet and completely destroys about 900 square miles of terra firma. That's an area about 34 miles in diameter. It would completely destroy cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Detroit, New York, New Orleans, you name it. It just completely wipes it out. Ours now is a ground burst. That's a totally different military application of the bomb. What it does is essentially goes off at ground level and it'll dig a hole in the ground about 450 or 500 feet deep and about 3/4 of a mile or a mile wide. If you're ever up in Winslow, go and take a look at the meteor crater up there. That's about the same thing. So to some degree, we were one of the original bunker busters, believe it or not. A 9 megaton bomb will do it too. With that in mind, we know that we are a retaliatory system and we are only going to launch if our adversaries have launched at us, and the president says launch Titans. Well, let's assume that the president has authoritative information that our adversaries have launched at us, and then he turns around and there's a little guy following him with what they call a football, and he says launch Titans. And just very shortly, this is what you're going to hear. Thank you, George. Okay, at that point in time, the adrenaline level in this crew is running about 500% above normal. And what happens is you get these two speakers going off. SAC headquarters, Omaha, Nebraska, 15th Air Force Base, Riverside, California. The commander and the deputy take out their code books and they copy down a 35-digit structured message. When they have done that, they trade books and the speakers repeat what went on. And then when they are both absolutely convinced that they have heard exactly the same thing, it's authorization. And we take our locks off the safe and we take out 3 critical items for the launch. The first critical item for the launch, at least for me, would be, did the president really order me to launch this thing? So we've got about 10 or 12 authenticator cards on the inside of that safe. And there's a 7-digit string in our message that came in, and it tells us which one of these cards to take. Well, let's assume that the first 2 letters are WD. So we take WD, we take it, we open it up, and we take out another card. It's got all 7 digits on it. If that exactly matches what came in on our message, the president has ordered us to launch this missile. What's the other things that we take out? Well, we take out the PSYOPs, single integrated operating orders, and we calculate what our launch time is. Remember, we have to be coordinated now. We've got B-52s, we've got Trident submarines, we've got all of those things, so they will tell us what time to launch. We calculate it, write it on the face of the clock. The other things that we take out of the safe are what? Keys. And unfortunately, our little system here has failed us, but we'll work around that anyway. Normally what would happen is we would have a key for the commander there, another one over here for the deputy commander. They're over 7 feet apart. You can't reach them both at the same time. They are spring-loaded to the off position. Now here's some more 2 inputs for 1 output. Those two keys have to be turned within 2 seconds of each other and held for 5 seconds in order to initiate the launch. What else came in with our order? Butterfly valve lock. It's never been aboard this system, nor was it at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Even if somebody broke in here, their chances of launching that missile were really just about zero. So, with that in mind, we have our butterfly valve code in, we have our time written across our clock, and it is now time to launch. And so let's start the launch process now. Pay attention to how fast this goes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can, let's fire up here. There we go. It is now started, and we have our first blue light, which is tells us that we are launch enabled. Among other things, our butterfly valve code is correct. Our second light says activate batteries. 2 dry 28-volt batteries aboard that missile are being force-fed electrolyte. In 28 seconds, it's on its own. It doesn't need us for electricity at all. The next thing we have is that big 760-ton door is opening. We can't see it or feel it, but boy, it's opening, and it's going to do what? It's going to break the radar beam up there, and it's going to give us a bell up here and a red light. And that tells us that the door is opening. She jumped, and that also told us what it was. Now we are silo soft, vulnerable to our enemy's attack. We are now putting water to the bottom of the silo at 9,000 gallons per minute, and we have propellants going to the first stage engine, and then we will have ignition. And once we have ignition, 4 seconds later, the four bolts on that thrust mount that are holding the missile down to the thrust mount are detonated, and the missile goes up out of the silo, and in about 30 to 35 minutes, target 2 will disappear off the face of the earth. That's about how fast it happens, folks. From the time the president says sick 'em until the time we can put it in the air is maybe 6 or 7 minutes. Think back about Atlas I, Titan I. It took 15 to 18 minutes just to put liquid oxygen aboard. And this is why our adversaries knew that we had this. We made darn sure they knew that we had this thing, and because we showed it to them several times. I'll explain that when we get down to the silo. Now, that is the thing that makes Titan II so very, very important. My thoughts are these. What would be advantageous or nice for you folks to carry away from Titan II? Number one, it is extremely accurate. We can travel 6,000 to 6,500 statute miles and drop a 9 megaton thermonuclear bomb to within 1 mile of its target. Number two, it is very reliable. About 87% of the time that we would launch these things, they do launch. The next thing is that our adversaries knew this, and we made darn sure that they did. So the reliability, the accuracy is what made Titan II so very valuable to you and me. Well, to most of us. There's a few here that aren't quite that old. So with that in mind, those are the things that are important. The accuracy, the dependability of the system itself. So we are going to go down about 250 feet down from this pole right here to the silo itself. We're going to go down through a cableway, and we talked about shock isolation. And everything that is in that cableway is in fact shock isolated. Okay, this happens to be missile number 10. Neil Armstrong, the first man to land on the moon, took his first ride up into space on top of a Titan II. Now, we also took about 40 of them out to Vandenberg Air Force Base out in California for testing purposes. Now, we didn't take new ones out. What we did was we took, let's say we had been online and on mission for 15 years. They would come in and reverse the loading process and take everything, including the propellants, out to Vandenberg Air Force Base out in California, reload the whole thing, and then launch off to a little island out in the South Pacific called Kwajalein. Now, obviously, they had a mock reentry vehicle in it, but 87% of the time, it dropped that mock reentry vehicle right smack in the middle of that lagoon there at Kwajalein. Now, going around the island, because we had already told them what we were doing, and we told them all 40 times, they had the little boat going around out there, and they observed that we could drop this particular missile to within 1 mile of its intended target. And it obviously impressed them very much because they didn't even try to launch against us. So, with that in mind, Titan II was considered to be a 10-year program, and the last Titan II that was launched in October of 2003. We turned over about 14 of them to the military for weather satellites and communication satellites, that type of thing. So the last one that was launched about 40 years after it was first deployed as a 10-year program. We're going to go back up. When we get back up there, if you'd like, you can just go ahead and take off and go ahead and walk around the self-guided tour up on topside. If you have any more questions, I will be around there for a minute or two, and I would be more than happy to try and answer them for you. Those that need the elevator, if they will simply wait at the bottom of the stairs, Denny will take you back up, and if you want to ask some more questions, we'll be up on top.
To get down, was this an elevator that went down?
That's the one that goes all the way to the bottom.
Okay.
Excuse me, folks. Okay. You want to wait for me, folks, please?